All right, here with Nick Friedman, co-founder, College HUNKS, Hall and Junk, and you have a very interesting backstory, and I just heard some great things. So I'm looking forward to picking your brain because I just want to learn a lot today.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. So I've obviously know a little bit about your story about starting in college and then getting a nice corporate job, and you're like, this isn't for me. After getting a really good, high-paying corporate job, sound like the UN, maybe your co-founder Omar.
Yep.
So what happened? Like, why the leap? What made that happen?
Yeah,
for you?
it was sort of I wouldn't call it a leap, more of a stumble into initially. We started out in college. We were brought up to follow the more traditional career path. You work hard in school, you get good grades, you get a job or get into college, you get a job after college. And entrepreneurship actually wasn't as mainstream as it is today, right? There wasn't shows like Shark Tank or social media that helped promote it. It was actually kind of seen as more risky. And it was the summer before our senior year of college. My best friend from high school, his mom had a beat up cargo van. And she was like, why don't you guys go do something with the van? You can move people's furniture, haul their junk. And then she looked at us, she goes, you guys could be college hunks who haul junk. And we just laughed about it at first, but then we were like, actually, that's kind of catchy. And so we put it on computer, print out flyers, realized that people always wanted to talk about the name. They thought it was something kind of like what I call it now a pattern interrupt, not what people typically associate with movers and haulers. Yeah. And, we did it that summer. We went back to school our senior year. We ended up getting corporate jobs after college because we were like, oh, that was just a summer thing, and just felt very unfulfilled with that corporate experience in a very short period of time. So we had nothing really else to fall back to as an alternative except, hey, what about that funny name and that moving people's furniture? So I like to say, we didn't really, invent the next Facebook or Google, of course, but we took a very simple concept, trucks and labor, put a very creative brand on the exterior, and then ultimately a very intentional focus on the client experience, the team member experience. And we franchise it. So that's kind of what I call it now, a 20-year overnight success that's brought us to 300 franchise territories.
So obviously your territory is massive now, and nationwide, right?
You're in about 40 states.
Yeah. Is it how many stores you got?
So we have 350 territories, which is about 200 franchise owners across those territories.
And how big was the territory when you started?
We were just up in the DC area originally. So it was probably, 4 or 5 zones and just 1 or 2 trucks that we were covering. We call a territory about 300,000 to 400,000 of population.
Yeah,
is how we chop it up. And then we started, we built a pretty successful operation locally, but when we started, we were doing all the work ourselves. I always tell the story. So I apologize if your listeners heard this already, but we bought a 1-800 number to make ourselves look bigger and put it on the back of our truck. And it was still routed to my cell phone. So people would call to complain about driving, and I'd be in the driver's seat saying, oh, yeah, we'll fire those guys. Classic startup story of we're doing everything at once. Yeah. So probably fired ourselves 3 or 4 times that first summer. And, nobody, I don't think, grows up saying, hey, I want to own a moving company or junk company when I grow up. Yeah. But I think what we enjoyed was sort of the creative aspect of it, like coming up with fun marketing ideas, figuring out ways to get publicity and PR, which ultimately led us to the first episode of Shark Tank. And then, ultimately, we're also very passionate about the employee empowerment, employee development, mentorship component of our business. So that's what kind of kept us motivated in those early days, and then ultimately allowed us to keep growing.
I don't want to forget about asking about the employee development, but you mentioned pattern interrupt and marketing and PR. How has that changed? I know initially it was the name. What now? What does that look like to you now? What's important now for somebody who's in business? They're like, I just got to get some visibility.
So always branding has become one of our core values. We're values-based organization. We always preach it's not what's on the walls, it's what's in the halls, meaning how do we live the values? And always branding is one that we've always been passionate about because we're a consumer brand, right? Like we do business to business work, but we're primarily working with homeowners that are getting their garage cleaned out or their home moved. And so we need to be top of mind. We need to be recognizable. If they're doing a Google search, or nowadays, if they're doing an AI search, hopefully it's recommending us or talking about us. So we realized very early on the power of PR. Actually, a Washington Post reporter had seen one of our little yard signs and thought the name was catchy. She called the number on it. It was like, of course, I was in the driver's seat answering at the time. She's like, what is this College HUNKS business? I want to learn more. It sounds, interesting. I always cover unique and interesting kind of human interest stories. And we told her about the summer in the cargo van. We told her about, our senior year of college business plan. And so she wrote an article about it. Now, that article probably wouldn't have had as much of a splash today as it did back then, because back then there wasn't as much social media, or actually really any social media being shared. People actually, sat and read the newspaper with their morning coffee and clipped out articles that sounded interesting. So, But that was sort of the first light bulb moment for me that, okay, getting third party awareness, credibility, recognition, that matters. And so we've always made that sort of part of our focus. We don't expect any one single PR hit to make or break the business. We view it now as just, it's got to be continuous. And PR is kind of one of those things that doesn't ever happen sort of like continuously. It's sort of lumpy. You get a pop here or pop there, but we're always kind of trying to come up with different ideas, whether it's charitable partnerships, whether it's human interest stories, whether it's, time relevant. We did an interview yesterday about gas prices with the local news that could get picked up nationally because obviously we have trucks.
Sure.
And so that's relevant to
and not imagine the gas costs across the
across the system. Yeah, it doesn't help. That's for sure. But so I think, when you're a business owner or a leader, you have to have this mindset of, I'm willing to, I have a solution that helps people, whether it's a service, a product, my knowledge, and I need to provide that value to people. And so when you're doing that, you don't have to have this sort of, I think, stigma in your back of your mind that's holding you back of like, I don't want to be self-promotional, or I don't want to be too, showy about what we're doing. I think there's a line you don't want to cross about over, hyping what it is you can offer. But nowadays, like we like you're doing this podcast, we started a podcast as well. Like I think just content matters. And yes, it's very congested, and yes, quote unquote, everybody's doing it, but that's part of the table stake of being in the game. Sure. And then if you could find little angles or ways to separate yourself, then that helps as well.
Well, yeah. And I think there's a difference between going out there and sort of just bragging or whatever, pushing a promo versus providing some value.
That's right.
And delivering impact, right? You mentioned a few times about your development and what you're focused on, a lot of impact, knowledge, or if you're with the podcast, you're sharing knowledge. So that's valuable, but there's certainly a lot of it out there now, way more podcasts than there were a few years ago, but that's awesome to hear that. So the business is obviously, I saw maybe doing over 100 million in revenue as of a few years ago.
Yeah. So this year will be close to 300 million.
Oh man, congrats.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think back to you guys in that van, I mean, ever even a thought in your mind that you'd be over $300 million company?
I think 100 million was always, I take that back. $1 million was sort of like the first milestone. Like if we can get our business to do $1 million a year in revenue, that'd be incredible. We could join the Entrepreneurs Organization. That's their threshold for getting in. And then it was like 10 or 15 million. We could join the YPO, Young Presidents Organization. That's how I know your colleague, Kevin O'Connell. And so there were always sort of these little hurdles or milestones that we sought after. We had read an article about one of our competitors in the early days did 100 million, and we were like, wow, could you imagine what that would be like? Yeah. Then we did 100 million, and to your point, I don't think we ever contemplated 300 million. Now we're talking about the big B word, billion. How could we get there? So we've always been aspirational, had lofty ambitions, I should say, very ambitious, but I've always, especially more recently in my, I'll say, elder years as an entrepreneur, no longer sort of the young, scrappy startup entrepreneur that I used to be. I'm approaching it from a place of abundance, not scarcity. Yeah. And obviously it's probably easier for me to say now because we've got this abundant level that we've reached. But in the early days, it was like we were scratching and clawing and fighting just to get to a level that we thought was, impossible or out of reach. But, if we would say to ourselves, if we could just get there, we'll be okay. But then, of course, the goalpost always keeps moving, or you start getting, into a bigger room and surrounded by people that have, gotten much further and long. And so the perspective sometimes shifts. And if you allow that to, comparison, if you allow that to eat at you, I was never fulfilled in that, frame of mind. So I always kind of look at it from, hey, look at where we started to where we are. Let's, have a sense of confidence and pride in that. And then really for me, what is exciting is what I call potential maximization or actualization. Like how great can I become as a leader? How great can this brand become as a platform and provide the opportunities to franchise owners to reach their success goals, to help our team members elevate, and surpass their potential roadblocks. And so that's kind of, I think, what's allowed the journey to kind of continue to move without us getting complacent or without us getting bored.
Yeah. So you were on Shark Tank. Mm-hmm. Saw the clips, which is I love seeing that. That was, what year was that? That was.
It's hard to believe. So that I think it aired in like August of 2009, so roughly 17 years ago, which is like crazy.
Crazy thing.
Absolutely crazy. But I like to say I was one of the original contestants on Shark Tank, and when we went on the show, we didn't know what it was going to be. because it was a pilot episode.
Oh,
So we didn't know these
wow.
sharks that, we actually didn't know who they were going to be until we walked out there. And then when we walked out there, we still didn't know who they were because they weren't TV celebrities yet, right?
Sure.
So Mr. Wonderful hadn't really established himself as this dude that likes to be a jerk on television.
Yeah.
He was just being a jerk.
Yeah.
So like in my mind, I was like, oh man, this guy's a real, asshole. Like, and he's not letting the other sharks talk. They might be interested, but he's making it sound really negative. So when he declared himself out, it came off wrong. But I was like, so thank you. That means you get to stop talking, right? And it sounded, sort of like of course, a viral moment before things got shared. There wasn't as much virality back then because it was just television. But
Sure.
I like to think we could take credit for that show getting picked up for a second episode. And then, of course, I think Mark Cuban joined the show in like season 3, and that really took it off because he started throwing a lot of money around. And I think it's great. Those types of shows really, I think, help bring into the living room this notion of business and valuation and startup life and everything else.
So they had some doubts.
Well, so we went on there, and this was something else that a lot of people don't realize. We were pitching a sister company. We were going to call it College Foxes Packing Boxes.
Whoa, I love that.
Yeah. So the Sharks had a very similar reaction to the one you just had. It was good for television. I don't think it was good for business, for a business. But actually, Robert Herjavec made an offer. He was willing to, sort of take a gamble on this College Foxes concept that didn't exist yet, but he wanted equity in our College HUNKS business that did have like 3 or 4 franchises that had been sold. And so it was a reasonable offer. I think he offered us at the time like $250,000. He wanted 10% of College HUNKS, which, if we do the math, it'd probably be worth 100 times what he invested, valued it at that time. But nevertheless, we turned it down.
Yeah.
People are always like, "Oh, do you wish you had taken the offer?" I mean, I guess in hindsight, we didn't. If we had known he was going to become a celebrity, maybe that would have been beneficial to the brand.
Sure.
Maybe not. We'd had to give up 10% of what it's worth today, which is a lot. So, but yeah, that was kind of how it all shook out, and I felt like we were out there in front of the cameras forever. I mean, it was probably a 30, 45 minute exchange that they clipped down to like a 4 to 5 minute segment.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, now looking back, you said you were, had to grind, scrap it out. Did you all ever have doubts about the business? You're like, this isn't going to work.
Oh,
or
yeah.
Like we're at the end. This is like,
yeah.
not happening.
Yeah. Every other month still to this day. No, I'm just kidding. But, especially in the early days. So when we started franchising, we moved down here to Tampa to open up a call center and start franchising the business. And this was in 2008, 2009.
Okay.
So if you were to pick a time in history to launch a home service that's somewhat discretionary, based on discretionary income solution for homeowners, 08, 09 was probably not the ideal time frame, right? For those who can remember, it was the peak of the housing crisis collapse. And so people were getting foreclosed on. And then people would always be like, "Oh, well, you're probably getting a lot of foreclosure cleanouts and stuff." But like, you got to also think every landscaper, contractor, handyman was chasing after that business. So those prices got pushed so far down that it was hard to, make anything work. So that was the hardest probably time in our life, was in those early days when we're like running real fast and like, "Hey, we're going to franchise." And then we took that leap, and it was like we just like leaped into a brick wall and, had to sort of back up and dust ourselves off. But I also say that's probably one of the best things that could have happened to us, because had things been really easy street in those early days for too long, we would have gotten for sure complacent, probably overconfident. The ego would have gotten inflated. So it kind of like humbled us in the early days to where we said, like, we're either going to try to make this work, through resourcefulness, persistence, resilience, all the grit stuff that you hear is sort of intangible in entrepreneurs, and get better at figuring out how to get the phone to ring and how to get website visitors and how to convert the leads and how to sell franchises. And so I think that, it really was like a 4-year trudge through the mud, pulling an anchor behind us before we really started to see some, I'll say major breakthroughs and tailwinds. And of course, some of that was economic, with, interest rates getting lowered and the economy coming back. And we're in a tough interest rate climate now, which, impacts the housing market, which impacts, our business as well. Yeah. Thankfully, we're not sliding backwards, but it's, it's again, not like this post-COVID boom where everybody was moving, everybody was spending money.
Yeah. So a lot of free money in the market back then.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think for you, as you were driving the truck at one point, right? And then obviously you're not driving trucks these days, maybe for fun. You have a nice truck out in the lot now. What's the difference? Like, you're talking to entrepreneurs and they're in the business and they're like, I need to work on the business. I need to make that maybe it's like I got to let go,
Right.
sort of.
Yeah, it's a man, that's a more, in my opinion, more art than science, because like it's easy to say, hey, work on the business, not in the business. And of course, we read this book, which I think everybody should read who's in entrepreneurship. It's called The E-Myth Revisited by a guy named Michael Gerber. Kind of the key message in that book is have a long-term vision, create systems and processes for you to be able to then work on the business, not just in it. But it's very easy to say, very difficult to do, especially when the business is growing and there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in it to keep it going. But the concept that the book talks about is like, you know, if you are good at cooking pies and you start a pie shop, you spend all your time cooking pies, you essentially become kind of slave to the business, where like if you're not there cooking pies, the business doesn't function. And so in our example, it's like if we weren't driving the trucks, answering the phone and moving the furniture, there wasn't money coming in. So we needed to quickly learn how to systemize how we did those things early on, how to be able to hire, train, retain people to do some of those frontline tasks. And then eventually, when we could afford it, being able to bring in good people to handle more, you know, I would say subject matter specific tasks, whether it was marketing, operations, finance, franchise sales, franchise training, all of those sort of segmented pieces. And so I think, you know, you hear about letting go of the vine or being able to sort of let go of the wheel. You can't just do it like without some other folks to be able to take it. But in the early days, like some of our first hires, we didn't have systems. We just like hired somebody because they could fog a mirror, hand them the keys to this, you know, $100,000 truck and a job sheet for the day, and be scratching our heads when they came back with like barely enough money to cover, you know, the gas that went in the truck, let alone their labor costs. So like, okay, we didn't train that person how to do the work or how to price the jobs. So I think that's the key, is to, and now it's probably easier because you have tools like whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or, you know, these AI tools can literally like map out a standard operating playbook for whatever role, whatever company, whatever business that you want to operate. Now you still have to get good people to execute it. You still have to have the human element or evolve to, you know, the current conditions of what people are looking for. But we had to kind of do a lot of that manually in those early days.
What changes infrastructurally going from, hey, we're a small business, maybe $7 million to, you know, we're in that 1 to 10 to 10 to 100 infrastructure wise? Like what changed for you all? I mean, obviously technology too, but you know,
I mean,
people wise,
you know, it's funny. I use this cliche slogan. I like say it's the kind of the same devils, but a different level. And so it's, you know, getting good people, making sure that they can execute and uphold not just the values of the organization, but also the performance expectations for their role. And so when you're bigger, you just have more roles that need to be filled. So you have more people. So it's kind of a higher level, but it's, you know, sort of the same challenges. You can't rely as much on just sort of your own decision making and button pressing and lever pulling when you get bigger, because you got to be able to delegate and trust and empower specific individuals to be able to do those things. So again, it was kind of an evolution. Like we hired somebody that we could trust to train our franchise owners and help develop our franchise training manuals. We hired somebody else to manage the call center as we started getting more call volume that required more than 1 or 2 people answering the phones. We had to get somebody that could sort of build out that component of the business. But then there was, you know, some of those functions, the business got to a certain point where, you know, if we needed 100 call center agents, perhaps the person that built it to 25 to 30 wasn't quite equipped to get it to 100. So we either had to hire somebody over him, or we had to potentially, you know, have a difficult conversation that sometimes people's egos can't, you know, relate to, potentially getting demoted, if you will. So, you know, in some cases we had to help people find better positions outside the organizations where they'd be more fulfilled. So that's kind of the evolution of it, is sort of designing like, what does the business need to look like at each level as it grows. And to the point you made also is being aware of kind of the times, you know, leaning into social media, leaning into AI, whether it's people you bring in-house or bring in, you know, subject matter experts. They can help advise the company on how to, you know, either take advantage of or, you know, tap into those new tools and solutions that are now abundant.
Yeah, a lot of technology out there, and that's a whole area of expertise now to implement these tools. On the people side, because you mentioned, you know, employee development, people to people development, what are some of your core values around the people, and, you know, what are the things you focus on with your people to help them excel in their role?
Well, so one of our core values is building leaders. And the idea we have there is that, you know, whether it's people coming in to move furniture, haul junk, people coming in to answer the phone, or people coming in to be, in the corporate office or a franchise owner. We want individuals that have ambition and aspirations to get better in whatever sense that means. Become a better leader, become a better team player, become a better fill in the blank, whatever role they're filling in the organization. And so, I always used to think I would become like a basketball coach one day because I was really passionate about basketball when I was younger. But to me, this business model has allowed me and the team members within it to sort of like function as like a big sports team, sports organization where we're, at the franchisee level, we're hiring and recruiting our frontline team members, and we're trying to instill skills that can help them be better, not just while they're here, but when they leave here or when they go out into the community or they're, leading their family or what have you.
Yeah.
So that's the part that I enjoy. And so we do a building leaders conference for all of our, middle management. We do an annual franchise conference for all of our franchise owners. We have a ton of ongoing learning and development that takes place. As I mentioned, we just, started my own podcast, and, I was dragging my feet on that one because I was like, it seems like a lot of work, who's going to listen? But then I thought, well, we have our own captive audience as our franchise owners and team members. So at very least, they'll get value from the folks that we bring in. We can interview our own success stories as well as, some outside of the business. And that'll bring value. And if it bleeds outside and helps the brand outside of that, then it's just a bonus. So, and we have great stories. I mean, and what I always say is like building leaders does not mean everybody gets promoted. I think that's the biggest misconception is like, hey, I worked here for 3 months. You said your core value is building leaders. Why haven't I moved up?
Right.
And so the analogy I always like to use is it's like, moving up from the minor leagues to the major leagues in baseball, you can't be a mediocre minor league player. You got to be the absolute best major league player. And there's got to be an opening in the majors. So if there's not an opening, but you're the best minor league player, it's unfortunate, but you're going to be stuck in the minors. If there's an opening, but you're mediocre, you're probably not going to get that shot. And so not everybody moves up, but we have a lot of great stories where we can light the path for a potential for people moving up. And what's more important than moving up is people see how they've gotten better, how they've moved forward as a leader. And it may not be necessarily in title or pay, but it's in their skill set and their confidence level and their ability to, solve problems, be resourceful. So those are, I think, the measuring tools that we try to stick to that core value. And like I said, that's something I'm passionate about as a founder that allows me to kind of stay engaged and excited about the business.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that, everyone also has a role. And if they're really great in that role, I mean, that might be the fit for them. They don't always have to. I mean, there was a big shift for me going from an individual contributor in a sales organization to a middle manager, so to speak, before I jumped out and was like, I got to be an entrepreneur. But that middle management was not as fun or exciting as what I was doing individually for in a lot of ways. So everyone's got a role that they might want to play.
That's right.
Can they just do that to the best of their abilities?
And some people think like, even in our call center, like somebody's really good at sales thinks they should be like managing salespeople. And that's almost like the biggest sin of sales leadership. Right. You don't take LeBron off the basketball court.
Right.
Well, maybe you do soon because he's getting older, but in his prime, you don't take him off the basketball court to coach. Like he needs to be in the game.
Yeah.
And, a lot of great salespeople are really good at sales because they figured out a way to do it really effectively. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to coach to everybody else's sort of sales capacity or capabilities. Now, some people are able to make that transition. So it depends on the leader above them to identify who's going to be a great coach, leader, manager versus who's going to be an individual contributor. Right. And but then having that difficult conversation, because a lot of great salespeople are somewhat ego driven. So you got to be able to have that conversation. Like, dude, you're not going to be happy trying to manage people, like, because you need to be on the phone getting these deals done, and that's what fulfills you, and that's what you're going to make more money doing. So a lot of it is direct communication as well, and we've dealt with that at the mover and hauler level. We dealt with that in our call center. At the franchise coaching level, we got franchisees that want to expand into more territory, and we have to have difficult conversations. Say, hey, look, you haven't maximized what's in this territory. Why do you want to go build a new, territory over here and water down and spread out your marketing expense?
What was the first 100%? I love the analogy, the sports analogy. I use a football analogy. I'm like, you probably don't want your kicker throwing the ball as a quarterback, and probably don't want your quarterback kicking the ball in most cases.
That's right.
Everyone's got a role to play, and let's be as good as you can possibly be there, especially if you enjoy it.
And defining the roles, I think that's really important in business, is having very defined seats or roles on the field of who's doing what, and can you put a name on each of those roles? And sometimes in the early days, it might be your name as the founder, and sometimes there might be somebody you hire that his name is or her name is on 4 different seats of the business, and they're really best at 1 or 2 of them, but they're filling the other 2 or 3 just because there's nobody else to do it right now. And so that's sort of like the game management side of business leadership, is identifying, what are those roles, the equivalent of the kicker, the quarterback, the offensive lineman, in business, right? And it breaks down in business pretty simply. You got sales, you got marketing, you got finance, operations, technology, and, maybe a few other things like HR or otherwise. And so, you got to have, when you get to a certain size, leaders, functional leaders in those areas, and then, individual contributors within those teams.
Yeah. We focus a lot on helping people align what they are doing in the workplace to the things that actually matter in their life. And that doesn't always mean that they have to make a role change, because time, freedom, things may change because of that. And also what that role, what their direct impact is to the client and the business, and what impact we're making, because everyone is making an impact on the end result. And as long as they can feel that in their role, people are usually a bit more happy too, I found. What was the decision for you to franchise? Right? Because some businesses don't do that, right? And you did, and did it very well.
We had a little bit of a naive view of that as well. Maybe that's why it worked out. So when we got into franchising, we had read some books, and they used this term franchise, and they, the only one I had known really about that existed was McDonald's. And I realized, there's all these other brands and businesses where you can take a concept, somebody else pays you money to teach them how to run that concept, and then they pay you a percentage of how much they generate as they're running that concept. So at the time, it seemed like almost like a glamorized, I hate to say the word easy, but easier way for us to grow our business. It was far from that. It was anything but that. Omar, my business partner, describes it as a get rich slow process, because they don't tell you, or nobody told us, that until you have 50 or maybe even 100 franchisees, that royalty stream that you're getting is not really sufficient to cover the overhead you need to be able to sell and support additional franchises. So to get to that is a long, heavy march. And again, as I mentioned, when we started franchising, it was like 08, 09. So that was even tougher. But we joined the International Franchise Association as a sort of startup member, went to some conferences, read some books, talked to some mentors, and decided that was going to be the best way for us to expand our brand into other markets, because we didn't have a lot of capital. We didn't have a lot of talent that we could, deploy in other cities. We were kind of impatient. We wanted to grow the brand quickly. So franchising, I think, if you have a good, solid local business and you want to do all those things that I just mentioned, expand quickly, and you don't have resources, it's almost like a micro capitalization strategy, meaning every time somebody buys a franchise, you get a small injection of capital, but that gets burned up through commissions and, infrastructure. So that's how we got into it. I mean, I've considered myself somewhat versed in it now because we've been doing it so long, and it's very easy for me to like sort of discourage people from doing it now that we're sitting on the other side of the, canyon, but, or the valley or whatever. But yeah, a lot of people will ask me, hey, should I franchise my business? And I first want to try to understand like why they want to. Do they have the same naive view that we did? Because I want to make sure they understand it's going to be a lot harder and more expensive than you might think it's going to be. And then 2, if you can grow your business without having to sell franchises, just by putting a manager in place, or maybe a manager with some equity incentives that you can fire if they don't perform or if they don't align long term, then you might be better off. It gives you a little bit more span of control. You can do things a little bit more quickly. So it's a great business model though, because now we have 200 independent owners, many of which who have become millionaires through our business model, which is incredible to think. And so that's, I would say, a fulfilling aspect of it as well. And they employ, collectively thousands of people, through our brand.
Yeah, that's tremendous. I mean, but I'm sure there is like a naive view of, it seems easier if I don't have to take on all the.
Well, look, the broad brush, and I hate using broad brushes, but I'm going to use it, is like a very successful franchise owner, and this is not just College HUNKS, this is like the broad brush franchising generalization. A very successful franchise owner is going to at some point resent the franchisor because they're paying a percentage of royalties into the franchise system. The unsuccessful franchise owner at some point is going to blame the franchisor because you were supposed to help them be successful
Right.
when they bought the franchise. And of course there's this quiet middle. I related a lot to like running a government. Like you're collecting taxes, which is this fee, and they're expecting a certain level of goods and services. The really successful ones feel like they're paying too much tax. The unsuccessful ones feel like you're not getting enough support. And you need the vibrant middle class to be able to keep the the population on even ground. So, and the economy booming. So, but there's a lot of people dynamics in it. It's a relationship business, just like any. You've got to be able to understand it's collaborative. It's, they're not employees. We can't just fire them or tell them what to do, but there's certain brand standards and systems that we need everybody to kind of follow in the same direction. Otherwise, it kind of becomes difficult to move things forward.
Yeah. What's been the most impactful thing that you've learned in your journey building this business, and with the different experience you had from ground up?
I always say probably patience for the results, but not losing the bias for action and the sense of urgency of effort. So having that sort of duality of like, we got to get this stuff done today, but also understanding that like the results don't necessarily come today or even tomorrow, and not killing yourself in that process. So kind of finding this like, I don't know, Zen-like approach to business where you're, I think it was John Wooden said, be quick but don't hurry.
Sure.
Like you're moving things quickly, but you're not doing it in such a hurry that you're completely spilling and turning trucks and
great reference,
falling apart.
How long did it take for you from day one to feel like you've made? If you feel like you've made it, I mean, how long did it take to feel that way?
Yeah, I would say there's like micro moments where I've said like, or micro made it moments that like were these like little sort of almost surreal moments in time that happen where I'm like, whoa, this is pretty crazy. So going on Shark Tank was one of those moments where it's like, we're in the Hollywood, California, Seinfeld Studios. There's cameras swirling all around us. Now, I didn't necessarily think we had made it then, but it was like, what the heck? We're here in Hollywood filming a TV show about entrepreneurship, and we're, they're giving us a more than $1 million valuation of our business. So that was cool. And then when we do our annual franchise conference every year, I mean, it's grown from 10 attendees to over 500 attendees last year for our 20th anniversary. Last year,
20th anniversary. Congrats.
Yeah, we thank you. We had a private concert with Ludacris.
Nice.
He came and performed, and that was sort of a cool full circle moment because his music in the early 2000s when we started was like the soundtrack in our trucks as we're driving the trucks. So having him perform was, he's still obviously very relevant and kind of iconic. So that was cool. And so there's been a bunch of those sort of like pinch me type moments where I look out in the crowd and I see all these people that are wearing orange and green and excited about what we're doing. That feels like it's pretty exciting. So that's
ask him to put one of your trucks in one of those Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah, that's right. That would be great. That would be great. We should do so. That'd be cool to see some special effects, make it flip, blow up or something. Yeah. So it's just in the movies, not in real life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I mean, like it sounds like a lot of success, but you feel like you have a greater mission still ahead?
Yeah. I always, when I was younger, thought like, oh, I'll just work really hard, make a bunch of money, and then I can just chill and do nothing. Like that was like my goal back when I was younger. And then as I've gotten older, I realized that that's a very empty way of thinking about life. And B, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by great mentors and read a lot of books to see that like if you can find meaning and purpose behind the work that you do, that actually makes a positive impact, that can be a much more fulfilling and rewarding existence while we're here. And B, have a greater impact on other people. So it's sort of a win-win as opposed to just sort of like sitting back and doing nothing. It was I keep quoting these sports legends so you kind of see where I get a lot of my inspiration. But Nick Saban, I saw an interview with him and he said, complacency leads to bad decisions lead to bad outcomes. And I think that's so true. I mean, like anytime I look back on my, journey, whether we got complacent or, maybe a little comfortable, or even our franchisees, little comfortable, they took their kind of eye off the ball, or they didn't have as much, edge. And I do think you got to obviously find the right balance of me time and recovery time and family time and everything else. But yeah, for me, I'm just excited about trying to see how far we can take the brand. I feel like I'm still young enough that I got fire in my belly that I can still grind it out without having to necessarily, worry about, keeping the lights on, which is a good place to be. And so, I've dabbled in some other startups and shiny object distractions. But when I think about, the compound interest or compound effort of time and money,
Yeah.
where I put my focus. The business that's doing 300 million, if it grows 30%, that's another 100 million, like versus
That's crazy to think.
Yeah, versus the business that's doing 10 million. If it grows another 30%, that's 3 million. So like, why am I spending my time on the $10 million business when I could spend time on the $300 million business? So that's I think probably the exciting part for me is, like, wow, what's the potential opportunity here as a brand, as a leader, father, husband, business owner, and so forth.
How do you balance? I mean, maybe balance is the bad word. I don't really even like the word balance when it comes to this. I like integration best I can, but like family, personal health, running a $300 million company. I mean,
every time somebody asks me how I'm doing, I say I'm stretched. So I don't know if the balance is it, but I'm stretched in 5 or 6 different directions at any given time, and my goal is just to not make sure those stretches don't turn into a pop or a tear. Right. I boil down those examples in. I don't know if I heard this or made it up or both, but the 6 F's: family, fun, friends, fitness, finance, and faith. And so if I can kind of do a bit of a almost like a gut check on each one of those buckets, daily, weekly, monthly, to see where I maybe have neglected or maybe I need to pour a little bit more energy into, then I do that. But obviously family to me and faith are 2 priorities that I don't want to lose sight of. My kids are only going to be young for a certain period of time. I don't get that time back. I got to be there and be a role model. But I bring them to the office. I'll bring them to our annual franchise conference. So I do try to figure out ways to integrate them. Actually, one of my daughters auditioned. I made her audition. She's not getting the role automatically for one of our TV commercials. So we'll see if what the casting director thinks. I told him, don't be biased. And so,
I like that.
So yeah, I think there'll be some fun ways to integrate family with the business. Obviously fun, if you can.
Sounds like you're having a lot of fun
with that. Yeah, exactly. Fitness, that one is probably one that gets neglected, whether it's sleep, working out, meditation, which everybody says you should do, and I don't do consistently. I try it.
Once in a while, I get like a stint. I'll get like a few days in a row, and then it goes out the window.
They say that, I think it was 30 days in a row, you see physiological improvements, and I don't think I've been able to make it past 3 days in a row. So that really ought to be one of my commitments that I adhere to. You heard it here first.
I'll check you on that.
Yeah, but I do think especially, but when you're starting a business, if you're in the entrepreneurship grind mode, and you hear this from so many other folks online too, you're going to sacrifice other stuff. Like there's a guy that I'm friends with, Tommy Mello, who's grown $1 billion home service business, and he did it and waited to get married and have kids until he grew the business. And he said that he had to be 100% all in on his business, and because he didn't want to be distracted or stretched. He wanted to be 100%. Now he's recently got engaged. He's excited about having kids now, and probably easier for him to say that now he's a billionaire. But yeah, I think so. I think making those types of choices and understanding that where you pour your energy into is where you're going to get results, but you can only have so much time and energy to pour. And so you do need to be somewhat disciplined, discerning as to where you prioritize it.
Yeah. Cause fine. We pour out our cup into a lot of different buckets. For others, what, for me, it's fitness helps me refill my cup. I was meditating once in a while, not so much anymore. I do get a lot of fulfillment out of the work we do too, which is helpful. Anything specific that helps you fill your cup up, you're like, hey, I'm getting energized by this, so I can go give that back to people.
Honestly, reading is probably one of those things that I don't do consistently, but I'll do regularly. I mean, at least 6 to 10 books a year, if not more. And so that's only a book a month or every other month. It's not crazy, goal setting, but I'll dog ear pages, I'll circle things, I'll take notes to then bring back to the team or bring into my family. And so I think that's a piece that sort of energizes me. More recently, I started listening to podcasts on commutes. After I drop the kids off at school, on the way back to the office or back home, I'll have the 30-minute commute to listen to something and listen to it on 1.5x speed so I can get through it faster. So I think those things are ways to sort of, because you are what you consume, right? You always hear you become the average of the 5-6 people you hang around with, which I think is important. Everybody should do a sort of an audit of who they're spending time with. But I think it's also what you eat. what you're listening to, what you're looking at, like
Yeah.
all of those things, those senses get influenced. So if you're watching negative stuff online or on social media or the news, that is going to impact your mental state or your emotions. If you're listening to, podcasts versus, I don't know, hardcore rap like I did when I was younger, like that's going to change sort of your
Yeah, yeah,
mindset walking
yeah.
around. And there's probably a time and place for any of those things, and everything's moderation, right? Like if you want to have
Right.
that junk food or that dessert, okay, once in a while, not every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's also something to be cognizant of if you're trying to sort of optimize everything and how you do it.
Right. No, 100%. There's days where I'm like, I just want to listen to music today. I should be listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
But when I was listening to podcasts every day, for a while I did podcasts every day. I was reading every day during like 75 hard era of my
Right.
life. But I was like, I consume so much information,
Mhm.
and it was crazy how much I learned. And you're like, I really don't know a lot now that I know
Right.
all that I've consumed. But it is interesting. So you mentioned mentors. You read a lot. For you, what's been the impact of mentorship? What was like the onset of that? For people who are out there that maybe need a mentor, they're
Mhm.
sitting out there like, what do I do?
Yeah.
How did that come for you? And
Yeah.
what's
So my view on mentors is there's not like a set it, forget it. This is going to be my sole mentor, throughout the entire journey. The only person that I can call that is my dad. I call him my consigliere because like and even though he doesn't have any real relevant business experience related to what we're doing, it's just like he's my sounding board. If
Yeah.
I'm going through something, I call him and just kind of get his 2 cents. He's 83 years old now, so he's got a lot of life wisdom to share. But I've constantly sought out, especially when I was younger, folks that I felt I could look up to and learn from that were, further along the path or the journey that I was trying to pursue. So I found a woman who had essentially written the book on franchising, a woman named Shelly Sun. She started a company called Bright Star Care, and her book was called Grow Smart, Risk Less, all about franchising. And she was the chair of the International Franchise Association. So I tracked her down at the conference. I was like, just started picking her brain, asked if she, grab coffee with me. And, it's a very supportive kind of pay it forward type group. And I think that's true with any entrepreneurship community or business community or leadership community. You're going to find folks that are further ahead that want to help and mentor and guide, even if it's informal. Like I don't think I ever really said, hey, would you be my mentor? I think it was just sort of like, hey, can I pick your brain? Can I call you periodically? Right. Hey, I'm dealing with this situation. She's actually on our board now, which is phenomenal.
Oh,
and that has become a more formal relationship. I'm a big believer in peer groups. So I mentioned Entrepreneurs Organization when we were younger. Obviously you and I know Kevin O'Connell, who I know through YPO, several other of my friends, and what I'll call sort of peer mentors I consider are through that Young Presidents Organization. Nowadays, there's a lot of social media groups that people can get involved in that are specific and relevant to their industry.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that are further ahead that are excited to kind of help folks that are just getting started. Associations, trade associations associated with people's industry. So there's unlimited options out there, even if it's a virtual mentor or somebody that you don't even know personally, but you're able to sort of like tap into their brain trust. I listened to a lot of Tony Robbins stuff. I only actually met him once.
I saw that pic.
That was a funny story. So I was at a Lightning game here in Tampa, and he was sitting right next to me, and so I was like, I got to get up the courage to introduce myself. So I introduced myself and I was like, hey man, I used to listen to a lot of your CDs back in the day. I feel like I'm pretty successful because of you. And he kind of got like almost indignant. He poked me in my chest with his big Tony Robbins hand. He goes, no, you're successcent because of you. And I was like, oh man, thanks Tony. That's great. So,
typical Tony.
Classic. Yeah. And then he invited me, gave me, I think an email to send an email for like a free pass to one of his 3-day events, which I ended up attending. So like, of course, his Netflix show is called I'm Not Your Guru, but like, I consider him sort of almost like a virtual mentor, and I think I got to check this out, but I think he actually came up with like an AI Tony version of himself where you can like ask the AI Tony, because he just dumped all of his speeches, books, everything into this AI platform. Right. And now knows everything of what Tony would give the answer to.
That does seem like the future.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, hey, Tony, what should I do with this situation? Yeah. Well, here's what you should do.
They've got a personal Tony in their pocket.
That's right. Exactly.
Man, that's crazy. So if you were to go back and tell your younger self something, the very onset when you had that beat up van driving around, like what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to enjoy the journey, which just sounds cliche, to be more patient with the results, to understand that like when you're in sort of this waiting phase, it may be 2 months, it may be 2 years, it may be longer, but things are going to continue to evolve and grow if you continue to do the right things, and compound effort creates compound results over time.
Yeah. And so you have a book I saw, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we wrote a book. We were at a conference, and one of the speakers was like, anybody who's ever written a book always says they wish they did it 10 years ago. So go write it. This was about 15 years ago, actually.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm glad we did it then. And we went to the bar. We're like, oh, I guess we got to write a book. What should we write about? And he was like, well, why don't we write, we were only in our mid-20s at the time. We were like, why don't we write what we wish we had learned in high school and college that we now have learned kind of being in the fire of entrepreneurship for a few years. So it's called Effortless Entrepreneur, kind of an oxymoron because there's, of course, nothing effortless about it. But the idea was if you're, kind of in a flow state and enjoying and passionate about what you're doing, it's going to appear effortless to the outside eye. So we wrote about it. I reread it recently. I would say it's still 90% relevant. There's about 10% that I think we wrote with a little bit of a bachelor edge because it was in our 20s and it was right after the 4-Hour Workweek came out with Tim Ferriss. And I think we were like, oh, maybe we write it with a bit of an edge and bravado. It'll kind of sell more copies. It didn't work out that way, but we actually are. I can't give too much detail, but we are. And I never said I said I would never write another book. We actually are working on a second book. We just got a deal on. So that'll be probably next year, if not the year after that it comes out. Yeah.
Let's look for that new book. And then the podcast, tell me a bit about the podcast name. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So the podcast is Hunks Talking Junk. So a little play on our company name. But Hunks Talking Junk, leadership, branding, and culture. So, like yours, leaders and letters vibes, vision, vibes, and profit. We had to have a little tagline to kind of in our case, clarify that Hunks Talking Junk. We weren't talking about junk and we weren't actually talking smack to people is really, a play on the name of the company. But that's, I'm excited about that. We're interviewing our franchise owners and team members, as well as, some outside thought leaders and experts in various subjects. And actually we interviewed, his episode's not coming out till the summer, but one of the original sharks from Shark Tank, a guy named Kevin Harrington, who was on our episode. So that was actually a fun full circle experience moment for me. But then I have a website, nickfriedman.com, if you want to connect on social or, just inquire about our franchise opportunities or, any moving or junk removal, I guess.
Yeah. Hey, man.
We're here for it.
Everything. Junk removal, moving.
Yeah.
Find you for learning purposes.
That's right.
Yeah. Social media. You're on all the platforms. So we'll share the links. But I appreciate you coming out and talking about everything with us. It was
definitely.
awesome.
Congrats on your platform here and your business and success as well.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.